Hi, welcome to another bonus video dealing with my extended poem that's in 3 parts, Pieces and Parts. 2 days ago, I talked about the first piece of this 3-part poem, Pieces and Parts, the first piece. Today, I'm talking about the second piece. Now, if you didn't look at the previous video, I'd ask that you have a little bit of a look through it, only because more of the story will make sense if you have already seen the first piece video. Otherwise, I can kind of short form summarize it. At this point, I had been separated from my ex-husband for a year. I'd gotten through a very troubling, very difficult, very challenging academic year in my first year of teaching. And I was looking for some new avenues and trying to still find my feet on the new path that I had begun. However, it wasn't, smooth sailing as anything with that kind of a change is. There was lots of rebuilding going on. There was lots of figuring out who I was when I wasn't with anyone, without my family, without someone in my life, without living with someone that I had to check with and that kind of thing. So I always used poetry, always, all the way back to when I was first writing as a teenager, used poetry as a kind of therapy, poetry as a method of taking my emotions and pinning them to the page and thereby purging them as a catharsis. Whether it was a good memory that I wanted to relive every time I read the poem, or whether it was a bad memory that I wanted to forget, or at least if I learned from it, to then have that memory stay there and not plague me quite so much or not bother me all the time. So it's very much how I have always used my poetry, and Pieces and Parts is no different from that. I was building that life and learning about myself, learning about who I was when I wasn't with anybody, and when I was living in my dream job and building my own household and exploring other possibilities of traveling and doing all of these other things. And in that process, I always carried a notebook with me, the same as I do now. Whenever I go out for a reason other than work, or when I don't have a specific goal for going out, I always take my notebook with me, because I never know when inspiration will strike or when a poem will come across or what I might see that might trigger a memory that I want to write down. So I was in a coffee shop, which has happened before, and I was reading through the poems that were already in the notebook, which I had begun with the first piece of Pieces and Parts the day I moved into my own flat. So it wasn't intentional, but as I was reading through on that particular day, which was the 26th of July in 2012, I realized that it had been a year since Pieces and Parts, the first piece. It had been a year that I'd lived in the apartment on my own. It had been a little over a year since I had written down that shattered and broken feeling from the beginning of this path. So I decided that I would write a follow-up, that I would take stock of where I was and how I was feeling and what was new about how I was feeling, and that I would kind of write a follow-up to Pieces and Parts. Everything about it was halfway. As I read the first poem and relived that feeling and saw how I thought then, and then I thought about the year in between, and I thought about everything that had changed and how I had changed, and as I took stock, everything about it, everything about me, everything about the poem, everything about the changes that had come, everything was halfway. I was still kind of tenuously holding on to the plans that I had made before, to the hopes that I had made before, to what had brought me to this country, to what had brought me to the place that I was in. And I hadn't quite let go of all of those plans. I hadn't quite let go of all of those feelings and wants and desires. And so not yet letting go of the past, starting to build the future, but I was kind of undecided as to whether my actions and my building of the future was good or bad, and whether the parts of the past that I had already let go and the parts of the past that I was thinking about letting go was good or bad. It was unresolved, it was unfinished, and I was imminently frustrated. So I think that the second piece of Pieces and Parts kind of emblemizes or represents that frustration of being in limbo, not just being undecided, not just taking everything outside of my home that was new, all of the new lives, the new jobs, the new friends, not just taking that out of what was new and then coming home to reminders of what was old and getting frustrated that those pieces didn't fit together anymore, didn't want to fit together, and I wasn't even sure I wanted them to fit together, but part of me did. All of that kind of limbo and frustration, being impatient for clarity. I didn't want to be in the position I was in when I wrote second piece. Second piece was about that impatience for clarity and no longer wanting to just be hopeful, no longer wanting to just be optimistic, wanting more than I had before, wanting everything else that I didn't have before and more. So I wasn't just impatient for the old to resolve itself and fix that kind of broken feeling. I wanted better than I had before. I wanted to do it right, I wanted to do it better, and I wanted more for myself. I had higher expectations of what I was going to have and what I was going to achieve if I could just manage to get past that limbo and take the broken pieces of other dreams and other pathways and find a place to put them away. Maybe not necessarily throw them out, but find a place so that they could stay away from staring at me every time I thought about them. And so that is where second piece comes from. Now, it's important to know that I was trying to figure out at that point whether I was going to stay where I was living or whether I was going to move on, because after my first year of teaching, I was looking for a new school, still looking for that place where I fit in, where my teaching skills and the needs of the school and the needs of the student were apt. And it's taken me a very, very long time to find that, and I've thought I've found it a couple of times and been wrong. But at that stage, it was not just my emotional state and my own dealing with memories and futures that was in between. It was me in between jobs. It was me trying to decide how to deal with all of the in-between. And while it was a tumultuous time and it was a difficult time, I was a lot stronger for that year. I was no longer kind of just going through the motions. I was going through active changes. I was going through active thoughts. And so the taking stock was extremely good for me. And I think it is extremely good for all of us to kind of stop and look over what was and take stock of where we have moved on from that. And, being able to write poetry and keep track of the poetry does help you, even if it's not poetry, if it's regular journal writing or blogging or fiction writing. When you look back at things that you wrote previously, and take stock of how you have changed so that the writing changes, it's good for all of us because we're stronger than we think we are. And as we move forward, that strength only increases. So, for example, I read the last verse of the first piece in the previous video because while I was going through the motions but still hopeful, now in second piece, I was a lot stronger. Because you can't be frustrated if you're just going through the motion. You can't be irritated with limbo if you're just going through the motion. So at the end of the second piece, I still have that hopefulness that, nothing remains of hopes I once had. The picture is new. I want more than before. Anything is possible still, but I can't wait forever for clarity. I'll go to pieces. That knowledge that if I didn't get clarity, if I didn't build that solidity that I wanted, I was going to go to pieces again, and I absolutely 100% did not want that. So that is the message from the second piece. Thank you for listening, and I promise that I will give you the story behind the third and final piece in a couple of days. Until then, the poll was up on Monday to vote for what story you get to hear on Saturday for our regular Saturday video. And as always, if there is anyone that you know that would benefit from watching the videos or reading the poetry, my book is available on Amazon, and feel free to pass along these videos. Thank you.